The message title tonight is The Takedown of America. I'm just going to tell you, if that title makes you uncomfortable, you need to buckle up because it's going to get more bumpy. It's going to get more uncomfortable. The reason that Madonna said I was on fire is because I get emails daily. I get stuff all the time. She caught me right after I got an email. And yes, I was fired up. So we're going to look tonight. First of all, we're going to start with numbers. We're going to start with statistics of border crossings. If we look at 2023, 2022, those 2 years combined, we had roughly 5.7 million people come across the border, nearly 6 million people. In the month of January alone, we had over 961,000 people cross our border. These are the known ones. These do not obviously include gotaways. We don't know how many of those there were. If you do the math behind that, that's over 11.5 million people. That's an invasion that is not sustainable. So tonight we're going to look at what is driving this, what is behind that. Last week I had the privilege of interviewing a gentleman by the name of Yorm Ettinger. He's a retired Israeli ambassador to the U.S. He lives in Jerusalem. That was kind of cool. Wimberley, Texas, doing an interview, Jerusalem on the other end. He has about a 45-minute video that will be up on our social media tomorrow. But we isolated a couple of clips that have pertinent information to things going on in Texas right now, so I wanted to share that.
Don't intend to convert Latin Americans to Islam. Their intent is to weaken the U.S., and they rightly consider Latin America all the way to the border with Mexico to be the soft underbelly of the United States. And all that in addition to a very large number of sleeper cells, which they have already established in the U.S. And recently, Hezbollah terrorists have been training drug cartels in Mexico in the areas of car bombings and improvised explosive devices, aiming to exercise it, to practice it on the soil of the United States. And while
one thing that he went on to say is that Christopher Wray, our FBI director, he paid a visit to Israel, and it was a fact-finding mission. He went there saying, how can we defend ourselves against this threat? So he got the information, and he came back to the State Department, and they turned a deaf ear on it. When I get information like that, I don't get a little bit fired up. I get a lot fired up because that tells me that our administration does not care about we the people. Our administration cares only about them, their pocketbooks, and what is feeding the beast of globalism. Next, we have an interview. This is Clint McDonald. He's the Texas Border Sheriff's Coalition Executive Director. I contacted him and I said, we were going to interview down the road a little bit, but with what just played out in El Paso, I'd like to move that up. And we interviewed yesterday. So this is very current content. So hear what he's got to say about it.
Facilitating that. Are these non-governmental organizations, NGOs?
Yes, these are NGOs, and we have seen they have taken over this entire hotels, and the federal government is paying these NGOs to operate these things and take care of these people. So it's a massive funding opportunity for these organizations to have these federal contracts and get this money. So we have no idea or no way to know how much of this money is actually being spent on what the government wants it spent on. And we see it day in and day out in the cities along the border. It's just unreal, the amount of people flowing across the border, and as the situation happened in El Paso, when you have a group come through razor wire and just bulldoze over your National Guard troops, and you have law enforcement using less than lethal action against them with beanbags, then we are the joke of the world, and the world is seeing this.
Yes, they are.
The next thing that we're going to look at, have any of you heard of Brett Weinstein? Okay. He is an amazing intellect. He's a PhD. He is a former professor of evolutionary biology, author and podcaster. He did an interview on Tucker Carlson back in January. He was detailing his trip to the Darien Gap. And believe it or not, our border problems, they don't start at the Texas border or anywhere along the southern border solely. They also are starting down at the Darien Gap. We'll look at that. There'll be a map. But for right now, trust me, Darien is part of our problem. So he interviewed with Tucker Carlson. He reported seeing mostly Chinese military-aged men, a few women, and no children. He also reported seeing this huge bridge being built at Yavitsa. Well, that came out in January, so immediately you ask questions, well, why would they do that? And who's paying for it? Well, why? It's pretty obvious. It's to facilitate more invasion of our country and more drug and sex trafficking. But who's paying for it? I found that out on Saturday. Email hit my inbox. Epoch Times reported that China is the one paying for that bridge. Is anybody surprised? No. We knew that whoever was paying for it stood to gain the most, so now we know who stood to gain the most. It was China. Another group that went to the Darien included Ann Vandersteel, Michael Yon, and reporters from the Epoch Times. Do any of you know those names? Do those names resonate any? Okay, thank you. They reported seeing pretty much the same type of information, what Brett Weinstein had already shared. They went on to say that about a week after they left, mysteriously, one of the buildings in that compound was bombed. Well, not bombed. It was torched. It was burned. Guess which building it was? It was the office. It held the records. It held the records of everybody that had come through there. It held the records of the border agents, and it got torched. Does anybody believe that was a coincidence? No, that was no coincidence. They were trying to cover their tracks because the reporters had been there. That, by the way, was reported on the Mel K Show. Michael Yon, Ann Vandersteel, and the Epoch Times teamed up on that. That was reported on the Mel K Show. Does anybody know of that?
What was that? What did you say?
The Mel K Show. It is a podcast. Okay. While they were there, this team of reporters interviewed a couple of people there in the Panama area, in the Darien. One of them was Oriol Ortega. He's a former border patrol director. And he said the quiet part out loud. He said the UN is behind the chaos at the U.S.-Mexico border. They also interviewed another gentleman by the name of Joseph Humeyer. He said that invasion is a strategic engineered migration. So through the UN, International Organization for Migration, the UN is funding money, cash money in envelopes to these migrants to aid them as they come through there. We, as U.S. taxpayers, are funding that by funding the UN. Now we're going to look at Darien.
21. More than 6 million illegal immigrants have been apprehended at the southern border. That is more than the populations of 30 American states and more than the combined populations of Wyoming, Alaska, North Dakota, South Dakota, Idaho, and Montana combined. This investigation by muckraker.com proves that the collapse of the United States southern border is the result of deliberate planning by government and non-government entities. This story takes place inside the Darien Gap, the artery connecting North and South America, where the mass migration pipeline to the United States begins. To put it simply, migrants who cannot fly into any North American country first fly into South America, most frequently Quito, Ecuador, due to its easy entry requirements. From Ecuador, the migrants cross into Colombia and then trek across the Darien Gap, a lawless section of jungle where migrants are frequently raped, robbed, or killed. Those who make it across the jungle find themselves in Panama. This is where our story begins.
One of the things that I want you to pay attention to and just kind of keep in the back of your mind, we'll talk about it in more detail in just a moment. Agenda 2030. Anybody heard of that? Thank you. Before we go any farther, we're going to go through some acronyms. It's kind of like definitions. You need to understand them so that the material makes sense and you get the full message that's being conveyed. I think everyone knows what the UN stands for. There are many agencies that are under the umbrella of the UN. 3 of them are the IOM, we just looked at that, International Organization for Migration. They have a presence in 171 countries, and they're the ones responsible for fueling and funding migration, immigration, invasion, whatever you want to call it. UNESCO, that's the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, they promote world peace through education, arts, and science. And then there's the World Health Organization. They head up global health efforts. Remember we talked about NGOs just a moment ago? Those are non-governmental organizations. They're used by the government to do non-government work. Most are nonprofit. They're funded by both business and government. I don't know if you caught it when Clint McDonald was speaking, but he mentioned federal contracts that these NGOs get. Did anybody catch that? Okay. Federal contracts means federal payment. That means you and I in this room are helping pay for that. They are funding this and paying millions of dollars to these NGOs of our tax money to help facilitate the invasion of our country. And it's through the IOM. Last on the list is World Economic Forum. They are an international NGO. They were founded in 1971 by Klaus Schwab. So now we're going to talk about Agenda 2030 and 17 Sustainable Development Goals. If you go to the UN website, you will find this information. It's very plain. It's right in your face. They're not hiding it. You look at it and it looks pretty good on the surface because they tell you that you see things about clean air and clean water, wanting to help those less fortunate. It sounds great. The goals themselves are not the problem. The problem is how they intend to get there. So this is one of those topics that is way too broad to cover tonight. It's way too important to ignore. So we will be recording and putting up on our podcast a series of messages to delve in and do a deep dive into the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And I will let you all know when those are up. It is important that we pay attention to this because they are coming for us, and this is one of the ways they're doing it. I don't know who you are nodding right there, but you are my new best friend. Okay, UNESCO. They are seeking to impose global regulations and restrictions that will affect social media and the ability to communicate online. They said that this is in an article. Has anyone heard of Alex Newman? I know you two have. Okay. Alex Newman wrote an incredible article. It was in the Epoch Times last November. And in that, he said they want to restrict election and public health information. Well, here it is. In March 24, we see an article in the Epoch Times, different contributor. She says in her article, Meta platforms changed algorithms and the default limits political content. Do you know what Meta is? Facebook, Instagram, Threads, WhatsApp. All of those are under the umbrella of Meta, and they are now going to be censoring political content. If we disappear from Facebook, go to our website. We will keep you up to date on where you can find us. But it's possible we could disappear from Facebook. We came to the party kind of late with YouTube because I'm like, why do we even want to go there? We'll be in timeout in the first week. So we thought, well, okay, we'll go ahead and see what happens. So we are now on YouTube as well, but we don't know how long we will last because I don't think our content is within their guidelines.
What are you listed under in YouTube?
Andy? Okay.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Wait, the Truth Ministries.
Our names, sometimes we have to change the name a little bit from one platform to the next because maybe there's a conflict. So in general, it's going to be Awake to Truth Ministry. If you go to our website, the homepage has all of our links, and you can link from our homepage directly to our social media. So if we ever disappear from one of them, go to the homepage, find us in other places. So we also see that someone by the name of Melissa Fleming, anyone familiar with her? Okay, she is the UN head of global communications, and she's had a few things to say about silencing us and censoring our free speech. She had an article out, it was actually an interview, September of last year. In that interview, she said that they had partnered up with platforms, probably someone like Meta, and they were wanting to locate disinformation, and they wanted to eliminate that. So if you disagree with them, they deem that misinformation, and they want to censor you. There was another article. This is interesting. Sustainable Development Impact Meeting. She said it straight up, and I'm quoting it. She said, we want to find where disinformation travels and get there first. Does that sound like any type of censorship? I think so. Last year, the UN contributed 22%, the US contributed 22% of the annual $3.4 billion budget with the UN. That is just the general budget. That does not count how much we contribute to approximately 13 of the agencies that are within the umbrella of the UN, and we contribute to those as well. So by funding the UN, we're also funding our own silencing and suppression of free speech. So now we're going to move into something else that the UN has been involved in. Did any of you see in the news in February when the Hamas cell underneath the UN building in Gaza was discovered? Okay. Well, immediately the UN denied any knowledge of it. Of course they did. To his credit, Ted Cruz said this is unacceptable and we need to investigate. So we're going to help him investigate. We're going to watch a video.
Says its forces found the Hamas data center 60 feet under the UN Relief Agency headquarters in Gaza. The IDF says intelligence from interrogations, computers, and maps led to a tunnel shaft near an UNRWA school over 700 yards long. Combat engineers dug down 26 feet to get access since it had been blocked. The military says it found servers, electrical infrastructure, multiple blast doors, offices, and living quarters inside, as well as large quantities of weapons and explosives hidden in the UN agency's offices.
Not only was the UN aware of it, they were complicit in it. And we have corroborating information from Newsreel. Have any of you heard of Newsreel? Okay. They are a very credible news source out of Israel, and they said this absolutely was literal, not metaphorical, the UN connection with Hamas. So now we're moving on to a partnership. In 2019, the UN quietly formed a partnership with the World Economic Forum, and it was to accelerate the implementation of Agenda 2030. So we're going to listen to what they have to say about that. The World Economic Forum, who are they and what are they saying? First is Klaus Schwab. Let me give you a little background on him. He was born in Germany in 1938. His father ran a factory that Hitler once awarded the National Socialist Model Company of the Year. Do you think maybe he had a little bit of socialist indoctrination in his upbringing? I would think he did. So let's hear what he has to say.
I think we have to be prepared for a world where we see a fusion of our physical, our digital, and our biological dimensions. So it will be a world integrating the physical, biological, and the digital dimensions. So it will be a new world. And
he said it, you heard it. New world. Remember that.
I mean, COVID makes it.
Forgot to introduce him. Yuval Noah Harari. He is the top advisor to Klaus Schwab.
I mean, COVID makes it accelerates the process of digitalization and automatization. It legitimizes the deployment of mass surveillance, even in democratic countries, and it makes surveillance go under your skin.
He said it, you heard it, mass surveillance under your skin in a democratic country. We're a republic. He doesn't understand the difference. That's not the point. The point is they are after that kind of surveillance, even in America. Next, we're going to look at a treaty that has been worked on. Again, Brett Weinstein brought some amazing information on this. Are you aware that there is a treaty being talked about at the national levels, international levels, that could end our free speech? Okay, we're going to talk about that. The World Health Organization, we defined that a few minutes ago. It's the leading agency that champions global health efforts. So Brett Weinstein exposed them totally in an interview with Tucker Carlson. And I'm going to quote him because it's too good to mess up. He said, "I think it is fair to say we are in the middle of a coup. We are facing the end of our national and personal sovereignty. This, again, is a subject like Agenda 2030. It is too broad to cover tonight. It is also too important to ignore. We are going to do an in-depth, behind-the-scenes, deep dive into this, and we will be posting that on our podcast. It's important that we all understand what this is." So, in essence, what it is a treaty for pandemic preparedness. The WHO would try and tell you that the alterations that they are making are just, they're minor and they're procedural. They are not minor and they are not procedural. They are trying to completely overhaul that entire document. In fact, I read something this afternoon, just this afternoon. They are now in the 9th negotiation on that document. I'm just going to say this. Remember when Pelosi made the famous statement, we need to pass it to find out what's in it? Yeah. That's what they're trying to do with this bill. They are trying their very best to push this thing through before people know what it's all about. They are trying so hard to push it through. They had nations that signed off on a letter saying, we want you to support this. There are 194 nations that are part of this, and some of them sent out this letter. This happened. I saw it today. I think this was published maybe yesterday. You're the smart people in the room on that. But they are trying their best to get this pushed through before people wake up and know what it's all about. So we will do the deep dive, as I said, but here's just a high-level overview. This treaty, that's the other thing. They have changed it. They're now calling it an agreement because a treaty would require 2/3 approval by the Senate. And so now we're going to call it an agreement because we don't have to get Senate approval. This document, in essence, it gives the World Health Organization complete just power to declare a pandemic. It gives them to define what is a pandemic. If they decided that, okay, we're going to say that climate change is a pandemic, then they can declare a pandemic. And at that moment, when that happens, here's what is triggered. They have the right to mandate vaccines and gene therapies. They have the right to also restrict our travel based on whether we did or did not take them. It gives them the right to prohibit us from taking alternative therapies. And last but not least, it gives them the ability to deem disinformation or misinformation as an act of terrorism. So I think there might be some people in this room who would be deemed a terrorist because of that provision. Yeah, you'd be first in line.
Yes, it would.
So in looking at this, I'm just going to ask a question. The UN, the WHO, and the WEF, are they an unholy alliance? Okay, you beat me to it. Thank you. I was going to say yes. I was going to say, we give you the facts and you decide. You already did. Thank you. So now we're going to tie all this together.
Demonic.
Indeed, they are. So we're going to tie all this together. We have looked at things all over the map. We've looked at the invasion of our country. We've looked at who's coming over the border, who's already here. We've looked at the censorship of free speech. We've looked at weak foreign policy that is resulting in global embarrassment for our country, global humiliation of America. And the current regime in power is siding with global elitists that want to take us down. We stand between them and their end goal, which is, you call it what you want, one world government. You heard Klaus Schwab, New World Order, globalism. That's their end goal, and we are in their way. That's why they have come after us. So we're going to listen now to a message from someone who has been there, done that. This next slide shows a video of, and I'm going to make an attempt at his name, Nayib Bukele. He is the newly elected president of El Salvador. They suffered through 50 years of socialism and civil war, and they recently came out of that. And so he's giving encouragement to us, but also a stern warning.
They say globalism comes to die at feedback. I'm here to tell you that in El Salvador, it's already dead. But if you want globalism to die here too, you must be willing to unapologetically fight against everything and everyone that stands for it. Fight for your freedoms. Fight for your rights.
So his warning to us is that we can stop this, but we have got to wake up and speak up and stand up now. So we're going to close with action items. Action item number 1 is we need to communicate in very serious terms to our representatives how important it is that we defund the UN. We've got to stop feeding the beast of globalism that is tearing our country apart. They're invading us, censoring us, and we're paying for it by funding the UN. The next action item, and it's beyond an action item. I am imploring you, turn off your TV for just 1 hour a day and subscribe to some of these news sources that you've heard me. I've asked about. Anybody heard of Michael Yon, Ann Vandersteel, the Epoch Times, the Mel K Show? All of those are credible sources. For the love of all you hold dear, get educated and stop buying into everything that you're hearing on the television, because it's not all truth. In fact, I'd say a lot of it is not truth. Educate your children. Not just yourself, but educate your children, because if you think they are being taught the same things in history and civics lessons that we did when we were in school, you're sadly mistaken. So Dr. Ben Carson has a number of books that he has written. One is called Red, White, and Blue, Our Flag Matters to Me and You. Educate your children, your grandchildren. Your kids need to know the truth about America. Last but not least, watch the documentary Letter to the American Church. Eric Metaxas made a very sobering comment. He said, doing nothing in the face of evil is still evil. So none of us are off the hook. We do not have the luxury of sitting back and being complacent and waiting on somebody else to take action. We have got to take action ourselves, and I am imploring you to start by educating yourself. Last but not least, you can follow us, our website, awaketotruth.org. All of our social media platforms are on the bottom part of our homepage. We have cards, we have information out on the table outside. You can follow us, take our contact information. We post 2 to 3 times a week with up-to-date current content, and we source our material. We're very careful to only pick sources that we know are credible. Everything that you've seen tonight is sourced. It is on our website.